risky. And so Magnus takes his time for the first move. This is one of the key things in freestyle chess, that players take their time for making their first move. They are not rushing into it. And yes, there he goes. Pawn to c4 he plays. He opens up the bishop here. And what does Fabiano respond back with? He tries to be simple. He pushes his pawn to c5. An interesting move here is h4, trying to gain some space. Other interesting move is b4, giving up a pawn and playing in the style of Benko Gambit. But b4 is a bit too much for any human. b3 makes a lot of sense now. He opens up the queen, and as we had mentioned, the two diagonals have opened up. And Caruana also follows suit. He goes b6 here, opening up his own queen. And Magnus now writes down the score sheet. He's wondering what is the next way to play here. d4 is the best move, and he plays it. With this structure that he has, after pawn takes, he wants to take with the queen. Also, d5 could be an idea if it is not stopped. Fabi takes the pawn, pawn takes pawn, and now you take back with the queen. I already prefer white's position very slightly because of this very nice structure that you have of 4 pawns and 3 pawns here. But Caruana is like, I'm attacking your queen, Magnus. Where do you want to go? If you keep your queen active here on h4, then after knight f6 and d5 would be very strong. So Magnus comes back. He keeps in control the move d5. He puts his queen on an active square. And now the knight comes to f6. So he's preparing d5 here. I guess knight e3 makes a lot of sense. That's what he plays. He plays knight e3, stopping d5. And perhaps Fabi can do bishop b7 now. Well, he first plays rook e8. Maybe a slightly slow move, but on the other hand, you are preparing short castle here. Let's say, for example, I go knight f3. You can short castle with your rook coming up to f8. So Magnus now brings his bishop to b2 on the long diagonal. And the game is getting very exciting. Maybe there's knight e4 right in the center of the board. But he first plays his bishop to b7. Now, such a move looks very logical. You are putting pressure on the diagonal. But on the other hand, you are blocking your queen on a8. f3 played here, taking into control the e4 square. It cannot move in here, the knight. So a good move, pawn to f3. And bishop comes out to f4, pinning the knight here. And Magnus goes g3. Now this is a very key moment. Like, do you take on e3? Then Magnus gets a very nice position with the bishop pair. Or do you go back? Then why did you come to f4? Or you go to h6, which is a very ambitious move, which he plays. But now the bishop is a little bit offside. It's not so well placed. Knight goes to g2, defending the knight on e3. So improving the position here of the pieces. And he goes pawn to g6. So Fabi plays his pawn here, which is maybe not the best move. He should have maybe played queen b8 or tried for d5. But he goes g6, and this allows Magnus to now start putting pressure. He finds the best move, h4. Fantastic move. With h5 that could come up, g4, g5 that could come up. So a lot of pressure now on Caruana. He goes queen b8 after a massive think of 34 minutes. Instead, he should have played knight h5, giving up his rook here, which was an extremely difficult move to find. Magnus pushes forward with g4. He's not stopping. Fabi goes back with his bishop to g7. And I think the attack is going to continue with h5. You can see how Magnus beautifully is building up his position. h5 is on the board. h5 played. He wants to play h6. So bishop comes out to h6, putting pressure here on the diagonal. And you go long castle here, which is a good move. The king jumps a huge square castle on the c1 side. But Fabi puts his bishop on g5. He's fighting hard. This entire maneuver of going back and coming forward is a great one. He keeps the pin here going. And what is Magnus going to do next? Well, he makes this waiting move, bishop c2. Also, maybe wants to just park his king on b1. He understands that waiting is not a bad idea. Knight f4, the best move in the position, has been found. It's not so easy to pull down Caruana, one of the best players in the world. Magnus takes on f4. Queen takes f4. And now a very important move, knight to f1 needs to be found. And Magnus finds it. Excellent move. The thing is, you can't move the queen away because your bishop will hang. There is no way to give a discovered attack. So you have to trade. So he takes, knight takes. Is d5 possible here? d5 could be a possible move. Takes, helps white perhaps after king b1. So maybe Fabi is not going to play that. He goes e5. Interesting move. He's trying to create counterplay with e4, e3 coming down the board perhaps. King b1 by Magnus. He figures that if e4, then f4 wins material because the knight would be very shaky. So rook comes up to e6. I think Fabiano's plan with this e5 and rook e6 bit too ambitious. Maybe just d6 over there was good instead of e5. Pushes the pawn to h6. A very, very interesting decision by Magnus. He just wants to completely disable this rook, although you can always castle. So maybe the move h6 can be a double-edged sword. It becomes a weakness, but it also keeps back rank mate possibilities. This is just Magnus's intuition. It's inspired by Alpha Zero, which instead of keeping the tension, dissolves it, takes space. Short castle here by Fabi. How is Magnus going to continue next? Pushes his pawn to e4. Takes into control the d5 square. You can see the rook controlling d5, d6 and d7. All these squares in the position. And he goes pawn to d6. The knight is not doing much. We need to improve it. We may be wanting to get it to e3 to d5. Plays pawn to b4. The idea here is to put the bishop on b3. Goes knight d7. And king b1. Oof. King a1. Maybe the idea is knight b1, knight c3, knight d5. Yeah, it did feel like he wanted to go for that maneuver. Rook comes to c8, attacking the pawn on c4. I guess bishop b3 should be played here. He finds it. Bishop b3 is on the board. And now Fabiano, can he create counterplay with this idea of rook f6, putting pressure here? He finds it. Threatening bishop takes d2, rook d2 and perhaps rook takes f3. Lot of play here. But Magnus finds amazing move c5. What a move. And the point is, if you take d takes c5, I go knight c4, my knight is eyeing these squares. And so the best move here is b5, stopping this stuff. But he goes bishop a6. The bishop comes out to c4. Interesting move. So if bishop takes d2, there is bishop a6 hanging. He goes knight to b8 in the position. And now b5 is an idea. There are many possibilities. cb6, ab6. The move knight b8 is a mistake by Caruana. He should have played here bishop b7 back, which is a tough move. b5 found by Magnus, and instantly rook takes c5 by Fabi. And now you must take the bishop on a6, so takes, and the idea was to take on d2. But there's a small tactic which is coming in here, and that is rook takes d2, and after rook takes c4, he wants to take the pawn on e5. After de, there is a mate on d8. That's the big problem here. So bishop takes e5 taken, the rook is attacked. And now Fabi does not have too many moves. He goes rook e6. The problem with rook takes here was rook d6, and there's too much of problems on the back rank. So that's the reason why, and suddenly you will see the h6 pawn has become so valuable. This is what it means to push this pawn. Later when things open up, it becomes a huge asset. So knight takes the pawn on a6. And now a good idea could be king b2, rook d1. It's also a good move, just bringing the rook here. But Magnus makes an error. He goes bishop b8. And the point is he wants to win this pawn and threaten mate. But there is king f8. And if you take here, rook c7 actually traps the bishop. So this could be a very good move if Caruana finds it, which is king f8. It's an excellent move. But he makes an error with rook e8, allowing Magnus to take the pawn on a7. And now Magnus can snatch the pawn. Yes, he does. Bishop takes a7 on the board. Now the b6 pawn is hanging. He pushes b5. But if you look, he's already a pawn down. On the king side, Magnus has an extra pawn. Caruana is pawn down. The b pawn is a weak pawn. So brings the bishop back to d4 on a very good diagonal. And yeah, the knight comes back to c7. It intends to go to e6 to attack the bishop, try to control these squares. The bishop comes to f6. And the idea is just go here and get into the camp. And knight e6, he brings his rook into the game. Rook d1. Rook to a4 played. So the idea is to play rook a8 and put pressure here. Rook to d3. So rook b3, rook b1, put pressure on b5. And pawn to g5 pushed. Pushed his pawn to g5. Rook d2. He keeps the pawn protected here. b4. Pawn pushes forward. And now king b1 played here by Magnus. So Magnus calmly just playing this position. You will see that many of the times the reason why Magnus wins such endgames is because he's not in a hurry to win. He's just playing it slow and steady. Rook a8. And he goes bishop to e7. So this pawn is a bit weak, this pawn is a bit weak, and back rank is a bit weak. So too many issues here for black. Goes rook e8. And the bishop comes back to f6. He goes back to a8. Fabi has 1 minute 43 seconds. Magnus has 3 minutes 43 seconds. So rook comes to b2. The rook is putting pressure on the b4 pawn with the other rook joining in. So rook comes back to a6. And now taking on b4 could be very much possible, just that you have to be careful about your a2 pawn. I think Magnus doesn't want anything to be given here. He goes rook b3. And if knight to c5 to attack here and here, then rook b4, and if you take here, there is a mate on the back rank. So he goes knight to f8. He takes the pawn on g5. Bishop takes g5. And Magnus wins. Fabiano resigns here. With this, Magnus sets himself up in the finals to take on Hikaru Nakamura. What a game this was, by the way. Some